Hello, we are doing chapter 22, the respiratory system, and today it's part 1. Here's your table of contents, and let's start from the introduction. Why do you breathe? Well, it's a simple question, right? We inhale air to get some oxygen. Every cell in the body needs oxygen to receive energy. How we do it? Our cells use the process of cellular respiration where they take glucose, they take oxygen that we inhale and that is brought to our cells by the blood, and they produce carbon dioxide, they produce water, and they produce ATP, our energy molecules. Okay, so respiration involves both the respiratory system and the circulatory systems, our heart and our blood vessels. There are 4 processes that supply the body with oxygen and dispose of carbon dioxide. You need to know their names, and you need to know exactly in what system, in what part of it those processes happen. So first of them would be pulmonary ventilation, or what we usually call breathing. We breathe in, we breathe out. We breathe in air with a lot of oxygen, and we breathe out air with carbon dioxide. So movement of air into the lungs and out of the lungs, through the trachea, through the nose, is called pulmonary ventilation. Next one. External respiration. That is the process of exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide right here between the lungs and blood vessels. Our alveoli inside of the lungs give away oxygen to the blood and take carbon dioxide from the blood. So that happens in the lungs. That is gas exchange between lung alveoli and blood vessels, and that is called external respiration. Next one would be transportation. Oxygen is carried to the tissues through arteries and arterioles, and carbon dioxide will be carried from the tissues through the heart back to the lungs. When I say tissues, I mean absolutely all tissues of the body. Our nervous tissues, muscles, our skin, all of our organs, so all the tissues of the body. Finally, we have a process of internal respiration. Right here, inside of those organs and tissues, oxygen goes from the blood to the cells so they could make energy molecules, and carbon dioxide is released from the cells and goes to the blood. So again, internal respiration happens in all of the body tissues. Organs and structures of the respiratory system. Major organs would be nose, nasal cavity, and paranasal sinuses, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, and their branches inside of the lungs, and finally lungs and alveoli inside of their lungs. Don't forget about diaphragm, it's an important muscle for breathing. Zones of the respiratory system. Respiratory zone, that's how we call a site of gas exchange. And those would be small microscopic structures inside of our lungs. They are called respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, and alveoli. That's where oxygen goes from alveoli to the blood, and carbon dioxide goes from the blood into alveoli. Conducting zone, that would be all the organs and structures that carry oxygen to the alveoli, starting from the nose and into the lungs, and includes all other respiratory structures. And finally, we also have respiratory muscles, diaphragm, and other muscles that promote ventilation. We'll talk about them. We start from nose. Functions of the nose include: it provides a way for the air into the lungs. It moistens and warms the air. It also filters it and cleans from bacteria, from dust particles, and it serves as a resonating chamber for speech. When your nose doesn't work well, when it's clogged, your voice changes. And finally, inside of our nasal cavity, there are olfactory receptors for smell. Next one, external nose. That's what we can see from the outside. We have root of the nose, here a bridge between the eyes. That is a dorsum of the nose or back of the nose. On the sides there are ala structures made of cartilages. Right here we have philtrum, a shallow vertical groove from the nose going to the mouth. And finally we have nostrils or nares that allow us to inhale the air. That is a nasal cavity, and it's divided by a midline nasal septum into left and right sides, or two chambers. The nasal cavity ends right here. Nasal cavity ends, and that part is called nasal apertures, and they open into pharynx right here. Roof of the nose is made of ethmoid and sphenoid bones, and floor of the nasal cavity, that would be your hard palate, and right here there is soft palate. Vestibule. The anterior part of the nose is called vestibule. Inside of it there are hair, they called vibrissa, that filter coarse particles, large dust particles from the air we inhale. Olfactory mucosa or olfactory epithelium is located at the superior part of the nasal cavity, and right there are smell receptors. Respiratory epithelium or respiratory mucosa covering the nasal cavity. That would be pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. It means there is one layer of cells, all they are grounded to the basal membrane, but their nuclei are located at different levels, so it looks like there are many layers. They have cilia, and cilia are in mucus. And those mucous and serous secretions contain substances that can kill bacteria, lysozyme and defenses. And cilia moves that mucus contaminated with dust particles, with bacteria, posteriorly back to the throat, where we just swallow it. Inspired air gets warm inside of the nasal cavity by plexuses of capillaries and veins. So it means blood vessels are sitting really close to the surface, to their respiratory mucosa. That's why it can bleed relatively easy. And finally, inside of our respiratory mucosa, right under it, there will be sensory nerve endings. In case of irritation by large dust particles, we can sneeze. So nasal cavity, inside of it, to increase the surface of the nasal cavity so we could clean and warm our air better, we have three structures. They are called nasal concha, and here is superior nasal concha, in middle and inferior. If you look at that picture of the skull, this would be superior, middle, and inferior, and they are attached to the lateral sides of the nasal cavity. Before you continue, please remember to stop this video and answer the questions for part 1.1. We were talking about nasal cavity, and the main functions of the nasal mucosa and concha is to filter air, heat it, and moisten during inhalation. But there is another function. During exhalation, these structures reclaim heat and moisture, keeping it for the body. Paranasal sinuses are opening inside of the bones. That would be a frontal sinus and the frontal bone. Then we have small ethmoid sinuses, or sometimes they are called air cells because they are so small. Deeper into the head we have sphenoid sinus. And finally, in our maxillary bones we have maxillary sinuses. Those would be the largest ones. They not only make our skull lighter, but they also help to warm and moisten the air, and some amount of mucus is produced in those sinuses. Pharynx. Here is pharynx. It starts right here in the end of the nasal cavity, and it's a muscular tube that connects nasal cavity to the mouth oral cavity, and it ends right here at the level of larynx and esophagus. That is larynx, and that would be the trachea, and next to it there is esophagus. So pharynx goes from the base of the skull at this level all the way down to the neck at the level of 6 cervical vertebrae. Nasopharynx is a top part of the pharynx. It is lined with pseudostratified columnar epithelium, exactly as a nasal cavity. And when we are swallowing, look right here, that's our mouth, that's soft palate and uvula. And when we swallow, soft palate and uvula go up right here. They go right here up, and they close the nasal cavity. So our food and water wouldn't go into the nasal cavity. And that could happen if we try to drink, for example, when we are laying in bed. So soft palate and uvula close nasopharynx during swallowing. Pharyngeal tonsils or adenoids are located on the posterior wall of the nasopharynx. Then, right here, we also have openings left and right for our pharyngotympanic or auditory tubes. Pharyngotympanic tubes connect our pharynx, nasopharynx, with what part of the ear? Can you remember that? Think about it. Auditory tubes or pharyngotympanic, or they are called eustachian tubes. They connect nasopharynx with our middle ears, those small cavities that have ossicles, tiny bones inside of the ear. Okay, next. Oropharynx, this part of the pharynx. It's a passageway for food and air from the level of the soft palate to the epiglottis. And our oropharynx is lined of stratified squamous epithelium. It means right here we have a thicker epithelium made of many layers of mostly flat cells. Why? Because the food we swallow sometimes is not well chewed and can be pretty hard, and it can damage the epithelium if it was very thin and soft. Okay, isthmus, opening to the oral cavity, and palatine tonsils, here they are on the lateral walls of fauces. Lingual tonsils will be right here on the posterior surface of the tongue. Pay attention again how exactly air goes. We inhale air through the nose. It goes through the nasopharynx, oropharynx, laryngopharynx, right here into larynx, and through the trachea into our lungs. And food Food goes through our mouth, oropharynx, into esophagus. So the ways of food and air cross right here in oropharynx. Laryngopharynx, lower part, also where both food and air go. Air, when we breathe in, goes into the trachea, and when we swallow, epiglottis, the top part of the larynx, goes down and covers the entrance into the trachea, so we could swallow our food. And then epiglottis continues. Epiglottis, right here there is larynx, and it continues with the trachea. Okay, continue about structure of the larynx. Larynx is a voice box. Larynx is visible sometimes on the neck, and especially in males, and it's called Adam apple. Larynx is attached to the hyoid bone right here by special ligaments, and it opens into the laryngopharynx and continues down with trachea. Functions: it provides a patent airway. It's always open except the moments when we swallow. It routes air and food into proper channels, which is very important, so we wouldn't choke. And it is also responsible for voice production. Those are functions of the larynx. Larynx is made of cartilages, and you need to know their name. Epiglottis, the top one, so that is Adam apple right here. All that structure right here is larynx. Epiglottis is made of hyaline cartilage. It goes down and covers entrance to the trachea when we swallow. Then we have thyroid cartilage. Here it is. It continues all the way to the back, pretty large one. Adam apple. And that Adam's apple also is called laryngeal prominence. And under it there will be cricoid cartilage, which is shaped like a ring. Right under it will be trachea. Also, there are smaller cartilages. Right here we have erythenoid, corniculate, and cuneiform. Those are paired small cartilages. Epiglottis is elastic, and I already said that it covers the laryngeal entrance or inlet during swallowing. Vocal ligaments. Vocal folds, here they are right here. Vocal folds also are called true vocal cords. They are made of collagen fibers, but they also contain elastic fibers, so they are elastic. And they attach the erythenoid cartilage, this one, to the thyroid cartilage right here. They vibrate when we are talking, and vocal folds and the opening between them, it will be easier to show it on the models during our lab. So vocal folds and the opening between them is called glottis. Vocal folds and between them right here will be opening. Glottis. Folds vibrate to produce sound when air goes up from the lungs. Above vocal folds, there are vestibular folds right here. And they do not take part in sound production. They just help to close glottis during swallowing. So, together with epiglottis, they prevent choking. Before you continue, please remember to answer the questions. Part 1.3, Voice Production. So what is speech? There is a definition of speech here. It's intermittent release of expired air while opening and closing the glottis. So, expiration, we exhaling air, and glottis, those two true vocal cords and space between them, they keep opening and closing depending on what we're saying, how we're saying it. pitch of our voice is determined by the length and tension of the vocal cords. Children have smaller and shorter vocal cords, so their voice is higher, and adults' voice usually is lower comparing with them because they have longer vocal cords. Loudness depends upon the force of air. Valsalva maneuver. What is that? That is not right now the definition of Valsalva maneuver. It's not what you are doing to help somebody who is choking. It's a natural process happening in the body. When we close our larynx and start, let's say, pushing, prevent air passage, vocal folds, work a sphincter, and it's a special way of breathing. When glottis is closed, abdominal muscles contract and pressure inside of our abdomen goes up. It helps us during defecation, for example. It's exactly what women are doing during the childbirth when they're pushing, and it stabilizes the trunk. People do it during heavy lifting. Our windpipe, what's called trachea, starts from larynx, that's where it starts, and it goes all the way into the thoracic cavity, where it branches into two primary bronchi. So it is a tube connecting larynx to bronchi. It is lined with mucosa. Inside you will find ciliated pseudostratified epithelium with goblet cells. It means goblet cells produce mucus, and those cilia of pseudostratified epithelium, they can move that mucus together with particles of dust, bacteria that we inhale, and move it all the way up, where we swallow that, or if there is too much of that stuck to our cilia, to our epithelium, then we cough it out. Submucosa is the next layer of tracheal wall, and right there will be special ceromucous glands. And finally, the outer layer of trachea, made of connective tissue with tracheal cartilages. Those cartilages are C-shaped. Because they are C-shaped, you only can see them from the front. Here it is, from the front tracheal cartilage. But you can see that they do not connect on the back. They are C-shaped. Instead of cartilage on the back, those two ends of cartilage are connected with a special trachealis muscle. Okay, carina. Carina is a special cartilage at the very end of trachea that sits where trachea branches into bronchi. That's primary right bronchus and primary left bronchus, going to the left lung. If we make a transverse cut through the trachea, on the front of the neck right here, there will be tracheal cartilage. It's made of hyaline cartilage. And since it's a C-shaped, it's open to the back. Now we need to learn why. Posterior to the trachea, we have esophagus, a muscular tube connecting our throat to our stomach. That's where food goes down to the stomach. And esophageal walls, the walls of esophagus, are made mostly of smooth muscle. So, when we swallow our food and there is a lump of food going down through esophagus into the stomach, it's bulging right here into the trachea. That's why on the back side of the trachea there is only trachealis muscle, but there is no cartilage. That is the wall of the trachea. Outer layer, your pseudostratified columnar epithelium, covered with mucus. Then we have submucosa with seromucous glands, and finally in the inner layer serosa there are cartilage rings made of hyaline cartilage. Bronchi. Bronchi are branches of trachea. They enter the lungs and keep branching, carrying air with oxygen to all parts of the lungs. And air passages undergo 23 orders of branching. All that pattern, reminding a tree, is called the bronchial or the respiratory tree. So what is conducting zone? Let's remember that's the way of air from the nose into the pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, and lungs. And left and right bronchi originating straight from trachea are called primary. Each of them enters the lung in a place called hilum. Hilum is a place on the lung where bronchi and blood vessels and nerves enter the lung. Right main bronchus, this one, is wider, shorter, and it's more vertical, comparing with the left one, which is more narrow and less vertical. Why? Because right there, under the left bronchus, we have a heart. Each main bronchus, when it enters the lung, branches into lobar or secondary bronchi. There are three right secondary bronchi because there are 3 lobes in the right lung, and there are 2 lobes in the left lung. And each lobar bronchus supplies 1 lobe. Then each lobar bronchus branches into what is called segmental or tertiary bronchi, and those keep branching into smaller portions. Finally, when their branches become less than 1 millimeter in diameter, we call them bronchioles. And when they are even smaller than that, less than half a millimeter in diameter, we start calling them terminal bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles end up with alveoli. That's where the gas exchange will happen. From bronchi through bronchioles, structural changes happen. In large bronchi and mid-sized bronchi, we have cartilage in their walls, and then we have plates in small bronchi. And those cartilage rings and plates prevent them from closing, so they stay open always. In bronchioles, there is no cartilage. Epithelium changes from pseudostratified columnar to cuboidal, and there will be less and less cilia and goblet cells in small bronchi and bronchioles. And amount of smooth muscles is higher in small bronchi and bronchioles. So bronchioles have more muscle and no cartilage rings to keep them open. That's why people who have asthma, during asthma attack, smooth muscles inside of their bronchioles walls contract, and that's what asthma attack is about. Before you continue, please answer the questions for part 1.3. Respiratory zone. Respiratory zone, it's where a gas exchange happens between blood vessels, tiny capillaries, and alveoli, lung structures. So, respiratory bronchioles are branches of our terminal bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles arrive to the lungs right here and branch into respiratory bronchioles. And they branch into even smaller structure, alveolar ducts. Alveolar ducts end with clusters of alveoli. Each alveolus is a small, usually round structure containing air from which respiratory gases are exchanged with the pulmonary capillaries. Here are the capillaries. what exchange we're talking about. So oxygen goes to the blood from alveoli, and carbon dioxide goes from that blood into alveoli, and we exhale it. We have approximately 300 million alveoli in the lungs. It's a huge amount, and they are very small. Alveoli are surrounded by fine elastic fibers, and they contain open pores connecting them with each other. That's alveolus. Those are the pores. And those pores not only connect adjacent alveoli, they also allow air pressure through the lungs to equalize. The walls of alveoli are made of 3 types of cells. Type 1 alveolar cells would be just simple squamous epithelial cells, one layer of flat cells. Type 2 alveolar cells, right here, they are more like cube type cells, and they produce surfactant and some antimicrobial proteins. We'll be talking later about surfactant. And finally, we have macrophages that are responsible for destroying and removing all bacteria and viruses and keeping alveolar surfaces sterile. Respiratory membrane. So that wall that separates inner surface of their alveolus from the blood vessel, capillaries, that is called respiratory membrane. It is made of 2 layers of cells. One layer will be simple squamous epithelium that makes a wall of their capillaries. Another would be simple squamous epithelium, making the wall of alveolus, and between them there will be a basement membrane which is fused for both. Gases are going through that membrane back and forth. Oxygen is going from the alveolus to the blood. Carbon dioxide goes from the blood to the alveolus. Now, one more, the most important organ, lungs. Lungs take most of the space inside of our thoracic cavity. There are 2 of them, left and right, and between them there would be mediastinum. Root of the lung would be all vascular and bronchial structures, or simply saying tubes, that attach the lung to the structures in mediastinum. Here it is. That will be a bronchus, there will be pulmonary arteries, pulmonary veins. All of them together, that bundle of tubes going in and out of the lungs, we call it root. That place on the lung where those tubes enter and exit, that is called hilum. The surface of the lungs that faces the rib cage on the outside is called costal surface, anterior, lateral, and posterior. So let me show it on the other picture. So that would be anterior, sternum. So that is anterior costal surface, lateral right here, and that would be posterior. Superior tips of lungs are called apex. That would be base of the lungs. And left lung has a structure like a concavity for the heart. That's where the heart is located. And because the heart takes some space from the lung, left lung has only 2 lobes. Here it is. Left lung is smaller and it's made of 2 lobes. That would be superior lobe, that is inferior lobe, and they are separated by fissure. That's called oblique fissure, the left one. The right lung is made of 3 lobes, superior, middle, and inferior. Inferior and middle lobes are separated by right oblique fissure, and middle lobe is separated from superior lobe by horizontal fissure. Lobes are divided into smaller segments, and segments are divided into smallest subdivisions called lobules. Okay, blood supply. For gas exchange, lungs receive deoxygenated blood low with oxygen through the pulmonary arteries. You remember, I hope, that pulmonary arteries are branches of the pulmonary trunk that carries blood from the right ventricle of the heart. This deoxygenated blood that heart receives from vena cava and superior and inferior. Pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood from respiratory zones to the heart. They enter left atrium. Blood supply. Now, what about lung tissues themselves? All those bronchi and bronchioli, their walls have muscles, cartilages. All those tissues need energy too. They need oxygen too. That's why we have bronchial arteries providing oxygenated blood to lung tissue. They all arise from aorta and enter the lungs at the hilum. Here they are. There are several of them. And finally, pleura, the double-layered serous membrane surrounding both lungs. The outer layer of that membrane is attached to the walls of the thoracic cavity from the inside, and it is called parietal pleura. The other layer, the inner one, is attached to the surface of the lungs, and it is called visceral pleura. Between them, in the pleural cavity, there is some small amount of pleural fluid that provides lubrication and surface tension, and that lubrication is necessary to prevent friction that could destroy lungs, because lungs are moving all the time against the walls of the thoracic cavity when we are breathing. Please remember to answer the questions for part 1.4.